New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community. Proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.
Greetings and welcome along to the New Zealand Tech Podcast. Today, talking to Neil Cresswell from Portainer.io, which is a fascinating New Zealand startup that's really grown from a side hustle into, a software vendor with over 500,000 users. So welcome along to the podcast, Neil.
Thank you. And side hustle is actually being generous, more like a side project.
Wow. Really cool to have you here and to be able to delve into a little bit of the story. And look, I love hearing the backgrounds to New Zealand success stories, to startups. There are always so many lessons to learn. Mm-hmm. So hoping we'll get some interesting bits and pieces from you today. I guess, first of all for you, you're a Kiwi. Where in the country did you grow up?
On the North Shore, so shore boy through and through, Westlake boys all the way.
Yeah.
And I spent some time living in Wellington and then spent some time living overseas, so seen some of the world.
And so where did the sort of interest, where did you start getting drawn into the tech world and the business world? How did those things come about for you?
I actually started in tech when I was 16, believe it or not. I was one of IBM New Zealand's youngest employees at 18. So did my time at IBM, 13 plus years there, and which really set me up to understanding the world of corporate IT and what was expected from a CIO and a real challenge. And then thought, hey, I'm going to do my own thing, and went out and joined two other business partners and started doing some virtualization and storage consulting, and really just has grown from there. So I still think of myself as a young guy, even though you can see wrinkles. But yep.
So to get into a role at IBM as an 18-year-old, what do you think it was that opened that door?
I was actually headhunted, believe it or not. I was working for a small company here called Tico Computers. Which
I remember Tico.
You do? There you go, far out. So I actually was a service technician for them, and one of the managers at IBM had a Tico computer, and he brought it in for repair, and he was so blown away with the way that I serviced and handled his request that he made me an offer on the spot to come in for an interview, I should say, and went in for an interview, and it was pretty harsh, and he got offered the job and was like, hey, this is pretty cool, why not? So I think it was just more around really, really caring about the customer, making sure that they got what they expected. It was more from a customer perspective, what would I expect this thing to do, not from a supplier perspective, what's the minimum I can do to get this customer out of the way. So it was that kind of different mentality. And
where do you think that came from for you? Was that something in your upbringing? You've done other jobs?
To be fair, that is definitely my father. He's an engineer as well, and right from a young age had engineering philosophies drilled in. So I still consider myself now an engineer, and I always like to break things and fix things and build things and make things easier. So I think that was it. And never happy with just enough. Always it has to be right. So, yeah.
Right. That's a really good approach. So IBM, 13 years. What was that journey inside IBM? What did that sort of look like coming on board as an 18-year-old? Clearly, when you stepped off the IBM ship, you must have been through some pretty interesting learnings and experiences there, and some growth in terms of what you were doing from beginning to end.
Yeah, so I started out actually on the bench because of my. So whilst I was at Tico and still at least at IBM, I was at night shift at Tech, so studying electronics degree, and so I was fixing, because you don't fix things these days, but fixing power supplies, fixing monitors, actually fixing computers, soldering things. So I started out on the bench, wasn't happy with that, really wanted to be more customer facing, and so got myself a field service role out fixing PCs. I remember being a young 20-year-old fixing the servers at the police stations and fixing mission critical IT systems, and I remember the look on people's faces when this fresh young 20-year-old rocks up to fix their mission critical system. My career at IBM was amazing. I won a lot of awards at IBM, CEO awards. Just a drive for perfection. And really focusing on the customer. So progressed quite quickly through an IBM career and ended up being quite pivotal in IBM New Zealand's VMware and storage practice and consulting that, and did the very first VMware deployment in the country, and most of those, that's what took me to Wellington.
Right. And when you sort of look back at that, what were the things that stood out about IBM's environment? Because for you to flourish like that, it's not all on the individual. It's also creating that environment where people can move through the organisation. And I've had it before. Talk to people in a big organisation, and they're tearing their hair out because they can't. They want to get the organisation wants to keep them in a particular role for an extended period of time. They're ready to go on and do the next thing, and the organisation says, "Oh no, you've got to do your time and doing this or that." And
there's truth to that. There's truth, but you just need to make them aware that there's more value for them if you move. So move up to a different role inside them. But the main thing I think was the management structure around it. They really encourage you to have a 5 and 10 year plan. So it wasn't what are your KPIs for this year, what are your KPIs for next year, what's your desires for next year, where do you want to be in 5-10 years time, and really making you think as a person, what do I want to do with myself, where do I want to be, and then they said, okay, well now let's put in place a program to help you get there. And so there was training and leadership courses and all these other things to get you towards your 5 and 10 year plan, because they said as long as your 5 and 10 year plan aligns with what IBM can do for you, we'll take you on that journey. And that was amazing. So I did all sorts of leadership and mentoring training, and IBM like to breed leaders, not managers. So they take you on that journey.
That's brilliant. That's great. Yeah, it's interesting when I look back at varying people I've interacted with across the sector. There's probably a pretty solid share that have come through IBM. Maybe not so much in recent times, but when I look back for those of us who are a little bit older, IBM certainly played a really important role in the development of a lot of people within the sector here in New Zealand. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It's quite often now I go and I see people who I know as ex-IBM are in pretty big leadership positions across the IT sector in New Zealand. And it's like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I remember when I was living up in Singapore, I bumped into someone in the lobby of a building who used to be the IBM manager in Wellington. It's like, oh, fancy seeing you here. So you just never know.
Yeah. So when you got to that sort of end of your tenure with IBM, what did that next phase look like, and ultimately took you overseas?
Well, we first started out, so I joined VIFX, if you've heard of them, with Jeff Olive and Derek Leach, and we said, well, let's go and build this really amazing virtualization and storage practice. That was my technical background, and the three of us said, well, let's go and do something unique. Let's actually build something that is really customer focused and help bring this, at that stage, really emerging technology to market. How do we help the New Zealand market get the best out of virtualization and storage? And we as a company did really well. We got onto the Deloitte's Fastest 50. We became very successful in virtualizing enterprise New Zealand, and then decided, hey, well, let's actually expand. And we had the opportunity to go into Singapore and do the same thing up in Singapore, and so that's what took me up there.
Yep. So with starting that, you were one of three sort of founders and investors. How did that sort of side?
Yeah, one of three, and that grew. I think at our largest we had 50 staff. At that stage, I was already up in Singapore, so the New Zealand piece there is a little bit grey for me, but in Singapore we grew quite quickly as well. We were basically a partner of VMware up in Singapore, and I was personally travelling around Asia. In some places, I was in 4 countries in the same day, flying in, doing a consulting gig, and flying to the next country, consulting gig, and fly. So, got my eyes opened to very large scale and built quite good relationships with some really highfalutin CIOs and CTOs and CISOs through that process. And I think that's what began my change to, at least my mindset change, to say, well, at really large enterprise scale, what's expected? What does a CIO actually expect this thing to do before them to adopt this tech?
And were there when you look back now, were there some real sort of breakthroughs during that time in terms of whether it was challenges that helped you learn? I mean, hitting 4 countries in one day, that doesn't sound like you were on a sort of a relaxed gig at all.
No.
You must have been under a fair degree of pressure, being pushed into those sort of scenarios. And when you talk about these, really important leaders within the tech world, they would be very, very reliant on their technology. So you couldn't be dumping stuff on them that would break, or if you did, then there'd be a lot of pressure to get that fixed pretty quickly.
Yeah, one of the things I learnt, and this absolutely has carried through to Portainer, is so often you get these really high-flying consultants coming in and working with the CIO to develop a perfect solution for their needs. So you do all these consulting workshops. Okay, what are your needs? What are your constraints? And you build these really amazing solutions, and they're beautiful solutions for them, perfect solutions. They implement those solutions. A month later, you're starting to get SOS phone calls from them saying, "Hey, our guys are really struggling to deal with this thing. How do we use these tools that you provided us? We don't understand. Our guys, kind of didn't really focus in the skills transfer session. We're kind of lost. Can you come back?" And so you end up in this cycle where you're having to go back and forward and back and forward, back and forward. And that really taught me some lessons that says, you really need to make sure that the tools that the organizations are left with to run the platform, those tools need to be at a level and at a language that their staff can understand. If the tool is a perfect tool, but it's beyond the comprehension of the staff, you may as well not have any tools at all.
Well, it becomes pretty imperfect, doesn't it?
It does.
Right? And I guess this is one of the realities of in business and technology, that things that sort of look perfect, there's always aspects that are imperfect to whatever degree, and you never really find that absolutely perfect perfect solution, do you?
And so I had these experiences in the back of my mind dealing with CIOs and what they need. I had experiences with consulting and solutions that were hurting post go live because of the complexity of the technology. And these things are just learnings. They're just in my brain, locked away. At that point, nothing. And then a few years later, I got exposed to containers or to Docker technology and thought, man, this thing is amazing. This is an amazing technology. This is going to change the world. And for those that don't know what containers are, they are a game-changing piece of tech that make applications portable. You can run applications anywhere in isolation and really safe, secure, and scalable. And I thought, so this technology is going to change the world. Absolutely. This is the way applications are going to be deployed in the future. But my goodness, it's complicated. And whilst there were some tools that helped you get started, there were really no tools for ongoing use. So how do normal regular users inside an IT department use this tech? Unless you are an IT ninja and you spent forever learning this tech, you really were going to struggle. And so I'm sitting here thinking, I can't do this. I've got this knowledge in my brain that says a perfect solution is imperfect if no one can use it. The CIO wants this high degree of governance and control. This tech is all about freedom and no controls and complexity. There's no way that's going to enter mainstream. And that's what was really the first catalyst for how can I create a portal to make this tech easy to use, easier to manage, control, deploy, self-serve, all that kind of stuff.
So that's what you got to work on as your side interest.
Side interest, it really was. At this stage I was living in Indonesia and I was running a cloud service provider and I wanted to offer containers as a service, and I delivered that as, again, a perfect solution. Here is Docker as a service. Here is your API endpoint, because that's what we were told we needed to do. And the market's like, what is this? How do I engage with this thing? So then back to my learnings. Well, that's right. Unless I provide a means for people to engage with this thing at a level they understand, they won't know how to use it. And so had Portainer written. And thankfully I bumped into my now co-founder, Anthony Lapena. Bumped into him. He's a guy from France, was over here on a working holiday, and we met up at a Docker meetup actually, and started talking and said, hey, I've got this great idea. What do you think? And he says, well, I know how to cut code. Let's have a go. And so I started writing this thing, and it just became really successful. People really liked it. Within 6 months of us making it available, we had over 1 million downloads of the thing, and that was without even trying.
Wow, yeah, that's impressive. Now, starting something like this, I remember I've have varying bits of advice around choosing business partners, but I remember quite early on, I don't even know whether this was a particular period where I was really looking or thinking that much about being in business myself. So I had some experiences in the technology sector that put me off the idea of running a business, which is, my younger years, I thought I would, my teenage years, I thought, probably mid-teens, I thought, yep, that's sort of part of what I'm going to do. But one of the bits of advice was to put at least as much effort into selecting a business partner as you would with finding someone to marry.
Yep.
How did that sort of piece play out for you? It sort of sounded like you stumbled across somebody, but you must have really clicked and really felt some confidence there, or was it just something that over time that confidence built up? I guess you didn't have a big view initially around what Portainer might be in the longer term.
I had no idea what it was going to become, to be fair. At the time, just my engagement with Anthony at that time, it was like he was a really smart young guy, really smart young guy, and I'm like, man, this guy gets what I'm talking about. He understands this tech, understands my vision to make it simpler and clearer, and I never had to explain anything to the guy. He just kind of understood what I was trying to do, and we would iterate ideas, and he'd just go and build this amazing product. And so, I kept saying he's the guy that made me look awesome. I had these ideas what I wanted to do. I had no ability technically to write the thing, yet just through discussions, he was able to pick this up and create this amazing product for me. And still to this day, he's the guy I lean on in regards to making this thing amazing.
Wow! So it just worked out. It
just worked out. I always say when it comes to choosing business partners, you need to make sure that each has your own unique strength.
Absolutely.
It's like a stool. If you take away a leg of the stool falls over. So you want to make sure that you each complement each other with your own bespoke piece of expertise. And with me, Jeff and Derek in the original VFX, that was us. We were a three-legged stool. And with Anthony, it was the same. He was strong in one area and I wasn't, and I was strong in an area and he wasn't. So again, complemented.
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's really good. And so you got the initial version of Portainer out there, open source, and loads of people were downloading it. When did you realise that this needed to be something you take pretty seriously and should be a really something you should be putting 100% of your time into?
Well, first of all, I had no idea what open source meant. It was just a cool thing. Everyone was doing it. Everyone was making products and making them open source, and I had no idea what that meant, what that entailed.
So you just said, yes, let's do that.
It's a great idea. Let's do that. It's open source. That's cool. Let's do that. That has actually been one of the key, I think, points of success for us, because that let us get the product to a really wide audience without any real marketing. And one of the key things, if you have an open source product and you have founders or people in the company who love and respect the community and want to build the community, you naturally engage with the community, and the community feeds off that, and the community just grows and grows and grows. And in the early days, as we were learning about the technology and making Portainer better, we were feeding back that knowledge to the community. This is what we're learning. This is some of the weaknesses or some of the shortcomings in the tech, or these are workarounds, and we're feeding this back, and the community liked that. And so the community grew as people gravitated to us to learn more information. And so it just kept self-propagating, self-increasing, and that really is what got us this huge groundswell of users to begin with. Just feedback. And it was really only 2 years ago when we said, hey man, this thing is actually starting to really snowball. Maybe, just maybe, there's actually a way to commercialize this. And there's been quite a few success stories of people who have commercialized open source software. It's not easy at all. The market, or the open source market, is a bit fickle. People sometimes associate open source equals free, as in no money, as opposed to free as in freedom. So you're constantly fighting against this thing, but it's open source. Why should I pay for it? So you're always pushing against that barrier. And more and more people are now accepting that open source doesn't necessarily mean free. There is still a huge element of that, but 2 years ago was definitely that point where we said, let's see what we can make of this thing, and it's been pretty successful so far.
Yeah. So having this product effectively that was available, open source for free. Mm-hmm. What was your thinking in terms of how you could take it from that to, being something that was going to pay for you to keep putting time into it and be able to fund establishing a really, solid business? How did you decide to, how you draw those lines and differentiate what's your community product, which is free, from your commercial offering?
Well, thankfully, we're not the first to do this. So we're not pioneering this. We're able to follow the leaders of this, and MongoDB is one that we've looked at before. There's lots of others who we can look at for inspiration and say, well, how did they commercialize this? And there's a lot of open source companies who say we will always only ever have an open source version, and the way that we commercialize that is through building a support business. That works well in the first year. The second year, very hard to actually retain customers. So if you give them an amazing service, the second year, why would they renew? So we know we didn't want to be a support business, support only. So we wanted to do something different. And then we said, okay, well, so if you're not a support business, you then have to have an open source and a premium version of your product. So we're going to go that way. And so then we said, well, how do you do that? Do we have the open source version and then plugins? And so we tried this thing called extensions, where you could take pieces of proprietary code and plug it into the open source version. And that was pretty successful, but people were saying that we were polluting the open source, the true virtues of open source. And so we said, okay, well, let's not do that again. Let's actually have a true proprietary version and the open source version, and they are different. And so that's where we are today. We've got this proprietary version, Portainer Business, and we've got the Portainer CE. Portainer Business is materially the same as Portainer CE. It's 90% the same, but we've got some bespoke functionality specifically for commercial users. And that's kind of the commercial model we went after and said, well, let's go after that approach. Let's now focus on just converting a small subset of our entire user base to pay for this commercial edition. And really, that is what a lot of these now industry giants in the open source space have done. And we're like, well, let's just follow that lead.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And so when you're looking at your, I guess, your user base and working out how to do that, was that hard to draw the lines around what you would charge and what the difference would be in functionality?
What we charge, yes, and I would say that's a discussion that will never end. Are we charging too much? Are we charging too little? If you ask 100 customers, half of them will say it's too cheap, half of them will say it's too expensive. So that's something that you will constantly refine and refine and refine. In regards to what features go where, we've tried to be as transparent as possible. You have to, if you're an open source company, you have to be open as well. So we're very transparent, and we said the community edition is more of a general purpose product. It has features in there for everybody. Doesn't matter if you're a home hobbyist or you're an enterprise. In the community edition, you have all the features. So sometimes a home hobbyist gets a bit frustrated because there's features really targeted for a business, and a business is a bit frustrated because there's features for a hobbyist. So we said, okay, well, for Portainer Business, we'll refine it and make it specifically optimized for businesses. So we'll take away some of the stuff that's for a hobbyist, and we can now add features specifically for enterprises without really annoying our open source user base. And that was really that point there. And we said, well, we're not going to take any features away from the open source version. We're not going to feature retard the open source version in any way. We'll just have specific commercial features over here in the business edition. And that's made it quite clean.
Yeah. And bringing people on board, obviously there's a point where it had to be, more than just the two of you?
Yeah, it's happened quite quickly actually. We were 2, then we were 5. We were 5 for quite some time until we did our first fundraise, and then we went from 5 to today 30, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll be 50. So it's pretty radical. When you hire that many people and you can't compromise quality, the hiring process is quite rigid. Your ability to take risks on people is somewhat diminished, and so we have relatively strict hiring processes we go through. That we really want them to understand our tech and also the programming languages we use. If they don't, we don't necessarily have the luxury of being able to upskill people. So we really need to hit the ground running. So we're hiring competence as we go. In a way, that's one of the positives to come from a very negative thing called COVID. There was a lot of talent came into New Zealand, people either coming home or seeking a safe haven, and we've been able to hire some amazing skilled people into the business. And it's fair to say, without COVID, would those people have come back to New Zealand? I doubt it. So we've got an amazing team right now of very talented people. So yeah. And
sort of looking at the longer term, do you think you will need to continue hiring on the same basis, which, once COVID's over may, push you away from hiring locally, or do you think you'll be able to, bring in and train up more people locally? I guess, what's your mix at the moment of people that are inside New Zealand versus anywhere else?
We have 23 in New Zealand, so the vast majority in New Zealand. So I think moving forward, we would probably be hiring in a lot more graduates. In fact, some of the better hires have been graduates who have come in with a really strong desire to learn and grow and come on the journey with us, and so they've been amazing. So I'd probably do more of that, and then still have excellence at the top, and then graduates coming in and training them up. If you have excellent people training graduates, guess what? Those graduates become excellent people.
Absolutely.
So I don't think I'd ever hire mediocre. Would hire juniors with a massive desire to learn, and really, really good people who want to teach.
What other challenges have you had, particularly over this past couple of years or so, moving from getting started to now where you've got to spend time out fundraising and doing other things that I often hear from founders and startups around their frustration that they're having to spend so much time away from actually doing the things that they enjoy.
Yep.
Trying to raise funding, because you've what are the funding rounds that you've done so far?
So we did a bridge to Series A. So obviously we were self-funded and bootstrapped for most of the journey. It was only mid last year where we said, well, actually, let's try and make something really big out of this thing, and so let's go get some funding. So we did bridge to Series A, and we just concluded our Series A, which went live last night, or the press release went live last night. So those are the two funding rounds. So the challenges, they're actually been time zone related. We're in the middle of nowhere here, and our users are not here. And so we're quite often doing product demonstrations or support calls, or just engaging with our community who are in inverse time zones. That makes it quite challenging. When it started out as a side hustle, it was great because I could get up early and spend a couple of hours in the morning and do a couple of hours at night up in the community. Now it's full time. If the more people you got in our time zone, and our users are not in our time zone, it makes it quite challenging. So definitely time zone, and not being able to get on a plane and go and meet our community. Again, back before COVID, we would attend as many meetups as we could. We'd present at meetups. We'd build the network. Anthony was flying around Europe attending all the meetups. This week he was in Scotland. The next week he was in Germany. He was flying around attending all the meetups, pitching Portainer, helping with brand awareness. We can't do that now. And so we started doing a lot of virtual meetups, but then now a lot of people have got Zoom fatigue and they just can't be bothered attending virtual meetups. So that's been quite challenging. And the moment that we get our jabs and we can get out of here, we'll be back on the meetup trail, attending conferences face to face, presenting this is what the thing does. That's the best way to market it.
So conference is absolutely key for you.
It is for brand awareness, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Are there any other things that have worked well for you from that marketing perspective and getting Portainer out there?
Interesting enough, with social media, this horrible thing called influencers, they are genuinely influential. Now, there are those influencers who you give product and they basically rave about the product, and there are those influencers who genuinely love the product and talk about it a lot. We're thankful to have the second. So we have a really large community who love the product and are vocal about it, and so we help empower those people. So we bring those people close in, and we make them available to talk to me, ask me any questions they like, and give them early insight. And so let them go and write blogs and create video and do whatever content to promote their own brand, but at the same time promoting our brand too. So that worked really well for us and still works well for us today. So we have our ambassador program, we have our community leader program, and anyone who genuinely shows a natural interest in the product, we help empower them to go and create content on our behalf. And that just keeps propagating. Mm. And really the only challenge I'd say was with us being open source, at least in the early stages before our current investors, getting funding for an open source business from New Zealand was quite challenging. I don't think there are many open source businesses in New Zealand, and so a lot of the New Zealand investors initially that we spoke to couldn't really get their head around it. We were quite lucky to come across Movac and Amplify and K1W1 who actually understood open source and how to make money from it. Before that we had some real challenges when it's not IP that you own and therefore IP is an asset that they can use as a guarantee for their investment. They struggled. So, it was really good to get onto some investors who genuinely understood the potential of open source businesses and help us grow.
That's great. And so how hard was it to do that first funding round?
Well, the amount of no's we had was astronomical. I was actually starting to doubt myself, saying, have I really made a product that no one wants? When you hear that many no's, this thing's never going to succeed. It's never going to succeed. No one will invest in you. You should sell it now for $1 and get out of it. And it was like, whoa, what have we done here?
Really?
Yeah, it's quite.
And who were you pitching? Who were you pitching to? Was this just New Zealand
No.
primarily?
No,
or?
not New Zealand. It was we were pitching to anybody who would actually listen to us, to be honest, initially, and so it became quite overwhelming. And it was only once we started getting into the investors who truly understood what we were doing, and they're like, man, we get this, we really get this. And it was like, okay, cool, your confidence starts to babble back up again. You're like, oh yeah, let's go. But yeah, there were some times I'm thinking, whoa, man, what have we done?
So how did you bring yourself through that? Because I'm absolutely sure there are some people that get to that point and they're out, right?
Advisors.
They just check out.
Advisors. We got advisors to help us through the process, and those advisors have said, for every yes, you'll get 100 no's. You just have to grin through the 100 no's to get that one yes. And so we just said, okay, fine. These people aren't going to get what we do. It's going to be normal to get these no's. The no's are not on us. You just get 100 no's for every one yes. So let's go. We want to get 6 yeses. Let's go get 600 no's out of the way as soon as we can. And it's like, and once you get that in your mind, this isn't personal. These guys just don't necessarily understand what we're doing, or it's not right for them right now. Then it's okay. It's nothing personal. They don't necessarily understand your product to say it's going to fail. So
yeah. And how did you get your pitch right? Because that's an important part, right? If your pitch isn't right, then you'll get 606 no's. But potentially. So that piece becomes pretty important.
Asking for feedback.
Yeah.
So whenever they said no, we asked why. Was there something you didn't understand? Was there an area of the pitch that we could have made more clear? Was it too technical? Was it not technical enough? Do we need to give you more information around this particular, around our sales strategy or our revenue forecasts, or what is it? So we learnt a lot by just asking why no, and improving. And again, back to these advisors who coached us on these 100 no's. These guys are veterans of the industry. They understand what works, and said this is really how your pitch deck should look. This is how you should pitch it. You've really got, for an hour long, you've really got 15 minutes of absolute attention. You get most of your messages across in the first 15 minutes, and then you've got lesser attention. And then so they basically just told us this is how you pitch. So pitch coaching, and went through those and refine. We didn't just write the pitch once, say, right, this is it, let's go give it. Every pitch was slightly different, slightly better. Sometimes it was slightly worse, and we're like, oh, that didn't work, and we'll try again. Okay, the next one was better. So we're pretty confident now, let's say.
And were you also looking for local funding from the likes of Callaghan and so on, or were you really just looking for that venture capital funding?
We never actually explored Callaghan, only because we just never did. So it's not to say we would ever try and be declined. We just never tried. I should try now, though.
And getting the right advisors. How did it sounds like you got some good advice because you got the right results. Mm-hmm. How did that come about? How did you find the advisors?
So they came from people in our network, so people who we already knew had successful careers, either governing large organisations or had governed organisations in the past and were now freelance advisors, or people who would come across in our dealings who we actually looked up to and respected in our meetings. Said, "Wow, this person's really smart. We could learn a lot from them. How do we bring them on board?" So it was really just FaceTime with these people, understanding their unique value prop and understanding their backgrounds and what made them successful in their own professional lives and why can they help us on the journey. And again, that was like finding a business partner.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like you did very well on that front. I'll often hear stories of just basically really poor advice, right? And so getting that piece right, you really got a huge benefit from networks and so on you've drawn from over time, but you must have been fairly astute in terms of what you were looking for too.
Well, so Jeff, Olaf and I, so we were basically running this whole fundraising phase, right? And so we kind of knew what we wanted to get across in regards to a message. And so the advisors would say, do this. And we're like, okay, cool. We know the message we want, so how does that advice fit in? So we didn't just take the advice carte blanche. It was like we put it through our own filters first and said, okay, well, what are we going to do here? How's this thing how will this help us tell the story? And so some of the advice was like if we do that, neither of us can pitch this because it's not our story anymore. So we had to put it through that filter and that lens to say, okay, well, we need to be confident pitching this freehand. I can't read a PowerPoint deck when you're pitching. Pitching's got to come from the heart.
Yeah.
So unless this is my story refined, it isn't going to work. So we had these advisors giving us information, but we put it through our filter.
Yeah. So you did that initial raise 2020. What did you raise that on that occasion?
1.2 US.
Yeah. And then you've just raised another $6 million US.
Yep. And the 1.2 was to basically prove that we could actually get a commercial version out the door, that the market would like a commercial version, and that we could start getting initial traction on that commercial version. And that was the key to the second funding. So, thankfully we got the commercial version out the door on time, on schedule, and it's been pretty well accepted. It's fair to say it was an MVP commercial version, so that's obviously what you can do. And now we've got ourselves a really strict product roadmap for this year and onwards to say this is what we're going to do to really make this thing valuable and make people want to buy it.
Just for some listeners that aren't familiar, describe MVP from your perspective. What you consider an MVP to be for Portainer.
Something that is actually uniquely valuable in its own right, but is not necessarily fully featured. So I could have added 20 features that were all pretty rubbish. That's not an MVP in my view. I'd much rather do two or three features that are amazing, so the customers can say, "Wow, I can see what these guys are trying to do here." So an MVP for most people is do everything, half cocked. That's a bad idea. I'd much rather, for me anyway, it's prove that you can do this amazing thing, build this amazing product by choosing 2 or 3 pieces of functionality and execute on that perfectly. And so that's what we did. We said we're gonna have a commercial version. There's going to be 3 features in it, and we're going to show that those 3 features can be absolutely mind blowing.
Fantastic. So where to from here? You've raised, I guess, in the direction of 10 million, New Zealand dollars.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a you've got a bit of capacity now to grow. It looks like you're doing something that's pretty exciting. What do you see as the potential for Portainer over the years ahead?
So we started out life just as a really simple Docker management UI. So it was a UI with a singular specific function, make Docker, the technology, easier to use. And that's what made us successful, but that would not be successful in the long run. We have to pivot and become far more broad. So we've already started the process to become a container native application deployment and management tool, regardless of the underlying technology. So we want people to log into Portainer in the morning and do everything they need to do to manage their container-based applications through Portainer, full stop. So not a Docker tool or a Kubernetes tool or any other tool. It's a tool to manage your container-based applications. Now, yes, we will let you manage Docker and Kubernetes and serverless containers and everything else, but for you, the user, it should be irrelevant. If you think about your Tesla, right? You get in the car, you push autopilot, you just expect it to work. You don't know about it. You don't care about how it works. Same with Portainer. We want you to use Portainer, deploy your applications. Should you necessarily need to know how Kubernetes works in all of its architecture? No, not relevant. And for the mainstream especially, it's less and less and less relevant to understand how this tech works. No one cares how the internet works. It just works.
Yeah, that's good. And look, you're working with a technology that is only going to continue to become relevant to more and more organisations. Mm-hmm. So you're riding a pretty big wave, aren't you? Yeah,
at the moment this technology, Kubernetes or Docker or containerization in general, it really is only available to organizations that can afford to spend the money to either get consultants in, get managed service providers in, or train or recruit very talented individuals who come at quite a high cost. That means the barrier to entry is very high. So our goal is to take that barrier to entry away, to make it far cheaper to get going with this technology. So any organization, regardless of their size, if you're an organization that's 3 people, why shouldn't you be able to use this technology? Why shouldn't you have the same capability to bring a really cool digital initiative to market just because you're 3 people? There shouldn't be a barrier to adopting this tech, and that's kind of our goal is bring this tech to everybody.
Love it. That's great. So, Neil, what have we missed? What should we have covered in terms of some of your learning, some of the advice you might share to others, whether they're in a startup or really in any business, tech or otherwise, that you've learnt along the way that has become a really valuable part of maybe how you operate now or how you've got through challenges along the way?
I think the only other learning is around the open source market. I said to you, it has its challenges at times. A lot of people think open source, cool, that's the way I can get free developers to cut code and give me code. That's just not true in any way, shape, nor form. Yes, you might get some people out there in your community creating features for you. Almost always, they'll be bug fixing for you. Creating net new capability, not so much. Fixing a small bug that's annoying for them, absolutely. But the biggest value from open source we've found so far is feature requests. People telling you, hey, I really love what you got, you're missing this feature, I think you should add it. That has been mind-blowing. But for those people out there who are looking to start a company and say open source because I can get free devs, news for you, and it's all bad. You are definitely putting in the hard graft building your product. People will help you fix bugs in it. They'll tell you what features it's missing, but in regards to helping you build it, not so much.
Yeah, good advice. Look, it's great to see Portainer off to a really good start, and fascinating to hear about your story. And I think for New Zealand, we need more Portainers, right? We need more innovative businesses being built here, grown, and especially exciting when we can have a good percentage of the people actually based here and contributing back into our New Zealand economy. And I guess we should expect to hear more stories like this. Where I don't know. I'd heard too much about Portainer, really until the last couple of days, and hearing about your recent fundraising round, and to me that's just totally fine, because the revenue you're generating is going to be probably 99% plus outside of New Zealand. It's
But
just
all coming back to New Zealand.
The economics, yeah, which is fantastic. So. Bring it on. Let's keep this stuff coming.
Yeah, and I've actually joined the NZ Tech Startups Facebook page, and really you see some really cool people coming in who've got these great ideas and they're wanting to build startups, and you see them struggling. They're out looking for co-founders, and they're out looking for developers to help them, and so some of these stories are amazing, and so you see what's potentially coming down the track in regards to cool tech, and it blows my mind. We really have a powerhouse here of intellect that can go and solve real-world problems, and that's, I think, back to our number 8 fencing wire approach to everything. There's a problem, let's solve it, and I think we're unique in the world with that particular modus operandus, right? we just want to solve a problem and can find a way.
Yeah, Kiwis are very good at that, and certainly I hope as we develop the podcast more this year, that we're going to be able to get to address some of those different sort of challenges that you come across with those that are getting started and at various points in their journey, that people will be able to tap in here and and really hear from people that have been through it before and capture more of that learning. So thanks for contributing to that.
Yeah, and there is no such thing as good luck, only hard work.
Love it. Awesome. Thank you, Neil. Much appreciated. And thanks, everyone, for joining us on the podcast today. We will look forward to catching you on the next episode next week. All right. See ya.
New Zealand Tech Podcast, the voice of the tech community. Proudly supported by Umbrella Connect.